So let's get to our next conversation. Bassirou Diomaye Faye has pledged systemic change, greater sovereignty, and claim after years of deadly turmoil in Senegal. A 44-year-old who had never held an elected office swept to first-round victory on the promise of radical reform just 10 days after being released from prison. He vowed to defend, quote, the integrity of the territory and national independence, and to spare no effort to achieve African unity, end quote. The former tax inspector becomes Senegal's fifth president since independence from France in 1960, and the first to admit to a polygamous marriage. Mr. Faye's campaign was launched while he was still in detention. Now let's speak to African Affairs analyst Dr. Victor Hai. He joins me on the program to discuss the emergence of the youngest president in Africa and what this means for youth leadership in the continent. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on your PhD, by the way. Yeah, I have to. I just figured it. I didn't know you now have your PhD. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Now I'm just getting to know things.
Thank you.
But let's get to the conversation. You have been doing a lot of conversation, around the African continent, especially in terms of leadership.
Yes.
Leadership. So when you observed, as you observed the developments in Senegal and the transition, what do you make of it?
I'm quite excited. This has long been coming, and I want you to observe the trend. There's something I've been saying in recent times, and that is that there's a generation, the generation that took over from the colonialists. They're on their way out now. That generation has been beholden to the colonialists, and they have been tethered to the apron strings of the colonialists as well. But there is another generation, the young people, from the millennials downwards, or maybe a little older downwards. Now, this particular generation didn't know about the colonial era or were not alive at the time. Many of them went to school in France, were in classroom with French people, beat them academically. They have sat with them they've done business with them and all that, and they find out that just like what happened during World War I or World War II, which was part of things that sparked off the agitation for independence, where our soldiers and our people went there and saw that bullets does not discriminate. Where it kills one is where it kills another, and that there's nothing they have over us. We're human, we're the same. So this generation have looked at it and said to themselves, enough is enough. You cannot, we studied economics together, you cannot come to my country and begin to plunder my resources and the French have been notorious for that in particular. I'm just using them as an example. And so, that has been something that's been going on internally, and so it started manifesting in things like the coup in Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, where although this was not a democratic takeover, but it was also a group of young people who thought to themselves, enough is enough. We cannot take this anymore. So what has happened is, what's his name again?
Macky Sall.
Yeah, Macky Sall. Macky Sall belongs to that old generation. People will want to sit tight in power, like the Musevenis and the rest of them, and he obviously, Senegal is a very, very sophisticated society. You have to give it to them. He wanted to extend his power and all that, tried all the tricks in the book, but the people resisted and they said no. And so, as part of the protest, you might say that Bassirou coming in is circumstantial because he was not supposed to be the candidate as such. So you might say it's circumstantial, but it was about time for young people. And what this has represented now is a whole new generation. The thought process, the thinking, and the relationship with the colonialists as well.
Well, let me ask you, because, this continent was also built on the back of very young and vibrant Africans.
I agree.
At that time.
At the time.
Yes.
Think about Zik and the rest of them.
The rest of them, they were quite young. The Inaholos, they were quite young.
Yes.
What happened? Where did we miss it? Where,
I'll tell you where the interregnum got in. These young people started, they were, they took over from the British and from the French and the colonialists. But notice, at that time, I wouldn't, not necessarily like, I wouldn't want to say mismanagement, but for them, ruling was something, being in charge of a nation was something still novel for a lot of them. A few of them mismanaged power, admittedly, and so the military took over. So that military era now created, it was more like, you can call it a black spot between the period of, what you call it now, independence and the early Democrats, let me put it that way. Then you had the interregnum, the military, across Africa. Not necessarily every. Senegal, I think, never had a military. They never had military rule. But most others had. And then we now came back. But notice, in coming back, that same first generation, because they had been established and they had been there since like forever, and their children as well, now continued. They are a dying generation right now. And many of them are trying to impose their children and their lackeys and all that. But we have a group of young people right now who are saying, no, enough is enough. And that's what you're saying. So, and this group, and what is peculiar about them, like I said, is that these are people who have, like I said, gone to school. Not necessarily all in the West, but even with the internet, there's democratization of knowledge now, if you like. So what you know, I know. You cannot come, for instance, like what's happening in Nigeria, where is it lithium or what, that they were selling for about 8 cents. The French were giving them 8 cents, and when they took over, they were now selling for about $200. Look at the gap. You can understand that. So that exploitation across the continent, especially among the Francophone territories, there's been general discontent. They know. But the people up there are, because they prop them and they continue to keep them, perpetuate them in power, it is in their interest to continue to serve the colonialists. But the young people are disgruntled, they're tired, and they're saying enough.
And just to also say, that age is not the requirement
for good governance.
For good governance.
No, I agree with you.
Just
on that.
to state
no,
that. But what we're really talking about is that inclusion and how young people have not been included. But I want this recent transition in Senegal, does it put the continent back on track in terms of inclusion? Is this a monumental shift?
Well, let me not look at it solely from a point of view of inclusion. Because if you say inclusion, our neighbors here, what's his name, Benin Republic, or is it Togo? Eyadema, I think there's an Eyadema still in power. I hope I'm right. I think one of the two is Benin or Togo. The son of one of the other post-colonial leaders is still in power. So it's like, so the fact that they are young doesn't necessarily mean it. But
would that not be Nasingbe?
Nasingbe Eyadema, yes. So it doesn't necessarily mean that because they are young, that it's a shift or a new generation. Not necessarily. But you see, what makes the difference here is the fact that the son of anybody can aspire and get into office. It shouldn't just be. It's not what you call a crown. It's not
a monarchy.
A monarchy. Thank you very much. It's not a monarchy where you talk about succession. So that's not what it is. It's supposed to be a democracy where anybody can aspire. Anybody can ask for votes, campaign, and be voted for. And so what has happened in Senegal is going to inspire a lot of young people, across the continent to want to aspire and to know that if you do, it is possible. You don't have to be the son of somebody to be able to aspire to be the ruler of your country.
What sort of statement does this also make about the increasing formidable strength that young people have in terms of shaping the political dynamics of the continent?
Well, the truth is that the strength of the continent is in its youth. And we have the youngest population globally. Our young people are our strengths. Unfortunately, we've not been able to tap into that. And which is why, if I may use Nigeria as an example, that energy, where it's not properly channeled, you begin to see people use it negatively. you know, where you find people doing 419 and the rest of them. I mean, it's not. But if you check very well, we have very many bright young people. The generation that started the second generation banks, the late Wigwe, for instance, Harvard, the Adenriokus of GT, you know, at that time, they were in their 30s and early 40s, you know, and it just tells you that, you know, at that age, people are at their optimal. They're able to, you know, they can rule the world in a manner of speaking, okay? But they need a chance. They need a place to stand and do it. They need to be given an opportunity. But there does appear to be, you know, some sort of glass ceiling, you know, above them, where people determine who rules and who does not. If you don't belong to the establishment, you cannot. So, but I think that with what is happening right now, away from business, in politics, young people can, given the chance, yes, there might be a few bad eggs, but they can actually bring a lot of dynamism, you know, and innovation in governance.
I'm sure you followed the conversation with our earlier guest, yes, aspirant from Ondo State, and we're talking about, you know, I was asking him about his track record and experience, and he did say, he mentioned them, but then he said, this whole idea of experience, that you really don't need the experience to lead. And then he then mentioned different sectors where you have young people who are doing well. And when you also follow the story of Jemaye Faye, you also realize that he has not had previous experience. Is experience really a myth?
No, okay, let me put it this way. The issue of experience, we've seen experienced thieves, excuse my language, experienced criminals in government. What experience does is you have something to fall back on. But it has nothing to do with leadership as such, and I'll tell you why. What is leadership basically, and I'm not going to defining and all that, but just to put it in a way that that the public can understand, it's just, having a vision that you can sell to people that they can buy into, believe in, and then, you can motivate them sufficiently to be able to achieve whatever it is that you want. In an atmosphere of chaos, whoever is able to take a lead at that point or provide direction becomes a leader at that point. Where we're talking about cars that are, if your car or 2 or 3 cars are bad here now, even if it's a kid that knows how to fix it, at that point he provides leadership because he understands and he knows he can point in the direction to go. And so leadership can be circumstantial, it can be situational. There are different types of leadership. So, but what is most important is whoever, particularly for nations, you need a person, or in any situation, you need a person who can inspire everyone, who everyone can believe sufficiently in, and who can actually take the people to, let me use the language, loose language, to the next level. That next level is probably where everybody is wanting to go to, or that place that everyone is hoping that they can be taken to. Whoever can provide a lead and a direction, that's what it requires. And how does it come about? If you look at, he's a young man right now. The whole country is putting its confidence in him to take them there. That automatically makes him a leader. And what it simply means is that they are willing to listen to him, they are willing to follow him, even if blindly initially, because there's a need to look up to someone to provide the leadership. And that's what he is. He has come, he's 40-something years old. Is it that they're not aware? Of course they are aware. There are 80-something-year-old, 70-something, 60-something, 50-something-year-old people, all of them together as one, came out and said, we believe in this young man. This man will take us there. That is leadership. Whether he misuses it or not is a different matter, which is why I can have bad leadership and good leadership. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say. So, but if it's about leadership, it has nothing to do with age, which is why in monarchical systems, if you are 3-year-old and you are the heir to the throne, the whole nation will rally behind you. We saw that a couple of years ago, the Dane of Asaba, when his father passed. Agbo. Agbo. Yes. All Agbo people, both in the diaspora and in Nigeria, everywhere, all over the world, this was their leader. They looked up to him.
And irrespective of the age.
It didn't matter. And he rose up and filled the role, and he's doing it very well.
But let's talk about those young people who have emerged in terms of leadership in their various countries around the world, not just even in Africa. Yes. You sort of find one common thread, at least for a few of them, let me say majority of them. You sort of find that common thread of the anti-establishment rhetoric. Most of them are anti-establishment candidates. Not, only a few of them come, from, major political parties. Does it now mean that for a young person to come to power, because a lot of young persons see major political parties as corrupt and so really don't want to have anything to do with those parties, does it then mean that, look, it has to be an anti-establishment candidate who, is from a different or a newer political party? Okay,
permit me to, if you don't mind,
go ahead,
to refer to the last election. I often tell people, I say, the reason people went after, supported Peter Obi, his supporters, was not because, for me, it's not necessarily because it was Peter. When I say for me, I'm not talking about as a supporter now. My opinion is that it's not necessarily because he is, because of necessarily what he did in, what do you call it now? Anambra State. If it's about performance, we had a Donald Duke, we had people who were brighter stars, if you like, But it was just the fact that young people had gotten fed up. And at that point, anything that seemed like light, and that's the anti-establishment thing you're talking about, any glimmer, anywhere they can. So it can be a protest. So votes can be protest votes as well. So at that point, and that was exactly what happened in Senegal, by the way. The people had just had it up to here. It's like, no, enough. You can't tell us. So,
especially because your other candidate was also the former prime minister.
Exactly. So, whoever, even if you are the best and you were brought by that president, they won't vote for you. Because at that point, they had it up to here. And so, at that point, it's like, who else? And that's what's happening. So, when you find situations like that in different countries, even in homes right now, anybody who has a Gen Z in their home know that their thinking is completely different. If you want to call them anti-establishment, call it so. But you go this way, they want to go that way. They are non-conformists. You understand? And so this generation, for instance, the Gen Zs, for instance, if they were to vote, if the rest of you are talking about this, honestly, they'll be looking the other way. So you might find a situation like that. And if they outnumber you and they're able to vote and they take an interest in voting, they can cause an upset.
As we begin to wind down this conversation, how important is how President Diomaye Faye navigates the hurdle in Senegal, not just for the future of Senegal, but also for the benchmark of youth leadership in the continent?
It's early days yet, and I don't have the eyes of prophecy, and neither do I know him personally, but I do know one thing. He started out on a good note. Unlike others, he has admitted he has 2 wives. The others will have it and pretend. There are little things that you look at, and it's a pointer to
honesty and integrity.
Yes, and integrity, exactly. So he's the first to admit. It's predominantly an Islamic society. Nobody says it's a crime to have more than 1 wife, but all the rest are there pretending and all that. But he's come out openly and proudly with his 2 wives and show the world that yes, I'm polygamous. I have 2 wives. That's a good sign. Okay, and as a young, he's a, let me call him a tax reformer, a tax expert. Where he was coming from, I think he will do well for the economy because he will now be looking beyond all the natural resources, but looking at how to generate income from within. He knows all the loopholes and how to plug them. So I think economically he will do well, by his people. And I also believe that because of the goodwill that has brought him in, he has an obligation to serve his people, and especially the young people of Senegal. I don't think he's going to kowtow to the French. I hope he doesn't. Let him be a man of his own and work for the Senegalese people and not for the French.
And we hope he does well. But, I was really talking about, because again, when you talk about women in leadership today, especially in Nigeria, what people do is to point to, a few women who they feel like they've been in office and, and were caught, in an act of corruption.
No, that's not fair.
And then people do that, and they forget the many other women who have done so well.
No, that's not fair.
In leadership.
Yes.
Do you think that how well President Jomaye Faye does in office could become a benchmark for people who say, oh, well, he was there, didn't do much, or he was there, he did well, let's give youth the chance?
Even without referring to him, I know that locally here when people want to, talk, they say, oh, the few young people that are there, what did they do? This one stole, that one stole. And they're not talking about the older people that stole. I think it's unfair. It's an unfair assessment. I really don't think that it's going to work against him because he's not just young. Yes, he came in democratically, but we have someone else a very young person also in Burkina Faso, who I think is even younger than Faye. He's younger, it's just that he's not democratically
absolutely,
elected.
yes,
In his
yes.
30s, I think.
Yes.
So, and he's doing very well. So if you're pointing to a Faye and you think he has done one or two things not quite right, then you should also look at the other ones who are doing well as well. So it might appear like it will be so, but I think that's for people who just don't have any better thing to say.
And like you said, he
does have that he'll do well.
He does have the goodwill of the people and the young people in Africa. I mean, it was a celebration for young people in Africa, not just for people in Senegal. And so I'm sure everyone is wishing him well.
And I think a lot more young people want to come out and aspire.
Absolutely. It's more like an inspiration for young people. Thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure to have you on. African Affairs Analyst, Dr. Victor Hai. Congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's Standpoint.